Hello to everyone who is here. This is the Space Week New York 2024 Spotlight event on NYCST, or the New York Consortium for Space Technology, brought to you by Empire Space. I am Patrick Chase. I am one of the co-founders of Empire Space. We are a nonprofit that has been working now for about 3 years to understand and then in turn grow the New York space ecosystem. Not going to do an in-depth briefing on us at the moment. EmpireSpace.org is the website if you want to learn more about us and our mission. But we brought about Space Week New York in order to highlight all of the great work that is going on in the New York space ecosystem, foster networking and awareness so that we can maximize opportunities to grow academic programming, to grow job opportunities in New York in the space and aerospace sector in the years ahead. So before I turn it over to today's featured guest, I think we do have a couple members of our team here. My co-founder, Evan Lerner, is here as well. And then our new programming manager, Quadri Bello, is on the call as well. So we have a growing team. We're happy to bring you this week's events. So this event here is an hour-long interview and Q&A focusing on the New York Consortium for Space Technology. It's headquartered at Cornell. It's a new initiative with a lot of really exciting possibilities for space here in New York. And to tell you about that, we have Mason Peck, the director of the New York Consortium for Space Technology himself. He is a man of many hats at Cornell. He has had his hand in a number of different space-related projects over the years. And we are honored to have him with us here today. So now I will turn it over to Mason to introduce himself and NYCST.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Evan, also, and thank you overall to the Empire Space folks for inviting me to be with you today. This is one of my favorite topics, talking about space. You'll have a hard time keeping me to an hour, but I trust, Patrick, you'll do your best. I am here to talk about this New York Consortium for Space Technology, Innovation and Development. It's a long word, a long set of words. We're going to call that NYCST. It's an initiative, as Patrick said, funded by the Department of Defense that's focused on strengthening the national defense space technology industry base. So that means manufacturing in the region, so not New York primarily, in the region for the sake of space technology relevant to DoD. Hope that makes sense. It sounds like a lot of different filters I'm putting on things, but in fact, the scope is quite broad. We have a facility, which I'm super excited about, I'm going to tell you about, that can support your work in space. We have project funding available, that is to say money from DoD that goes to you, the listener, to develop space technology. And we have opportunities for training and talent development. So the focus, once again, is on the industry base for advanced space technology in the region, but with an element of technology development, an element of business assistance, and also workforce development. Hope that makes sense. And if I've made a complete hash of that, please go to nyspacetech.com, where you can learn a lot more. I'm not going to take you to that website now, but I will go forward in a couple of other things. There's my ugly mug up in the upper left. I'm joined by all these beautiful people, which I will not introduce by name, but we have an extraordinary team here that has been helping and is ready to help you in your pursuit of advanced space technology. From the website, though, is a couple of key things. First, I'm going to put in a quick pitch for an upcoming symposium we're going to hold. So this is in about a month on June 14th. It's at the Cornell campus, so centrally located. We call it centrally isolated sometimes here. That centrally located event will feature some important speakers, opportunities to learn more about the space ecosystem, and a few other things of interest. But we'll talk about that later with Patrick. For right now, I want to again take your attention to the website, where I hope you'll be able to learn a bit more about things that may be of interest to you. That symposium, you can register for it now. It's not expensive at all. Again, talk about it more in detail. But to give you a little bit more of an overview of NYCST, I'm going to emphasize a couple things. One of them is these facilities. So centralized facilities for space technology innovation and development means you can have a small lab space. You can lock your stuff behind a door. You could keep ITAR-controlled material in there, if you know what ITAR means. If you don't, ask me a question. So it's secure and private and individual for your project. At the same time, it's in the middle of lots of other labs of a similar type, where you can have access to, for example, 3D printing, clean room space, vibe test facilities, and a variety of other things. Of particular interest, I think, is our focus on getting technologies from the very nascent stages, very early stages, all the way to a flight demonstration. So if you speak technology readiness level, we'll talk about that in a second, you'll recognize that as TRL 1 through 7. But let me explain what I mean. So let's imagine a kind of a use case here where you are, well, here's TRL. Let me sort of describe that. If you don't know TRL, quick insight. It's a numerical scale that allows us to understand how mature a technology is. The word readiness here comes from a military context. Are the troops ready for battle? Here, the troops are your technology. The battle is working in space. So TRL1 means you were hanging a picture in the bathroom, you slipped and hit your head, and when you woke up, you had a picture of the flux capacitor. And then you spent the next 20 years in your family fortune developing the time travel machine you put into a DeLorean. TRL1 is that first event. TRL7 or 8 or maybe 9 is the culmination of that. At TRL9, the actual system has been flight proven through successful mission operations. An example of that would be, let's say, a thruster that has flown on the space shuttle many times. That's TRL9. Universities, we tend to focus on TRL 1 through 3, but NYCST is not really exactly a university enterprise. Sure, we are the lead institution, Cornell, and we have other academic institutions as our partners, but also there's industry and government agencies. So if TRL 1, 2, 3 are the kind of early stage stuff, paper and pencil, maybe a few prototypes in the lab, the mid TRL 4, 5, 6, let's say, that refers to technology that is being prepared for flight. So it's not quite ready yet, but there are a few prototype activities you've already got under your belt. You're checking out the suitability of it in different environments to the point where finally at TRL 6, you've done everything you can on the ground to make sure that this technology would function successfully in space. You just haven't proven it yet. So when you launch it and try it out successfully, that system prototype has been demonstrated in a space environment. That's TRL 7. So that's TRL. NASA and DoD use this. By the way, other organizations also do. It's also worth knowing there are other versions of this thing. So there's a software readiness level version of it. There's a manufacturing readiness level. There's other things, but we're focusing here on technology. It's used for lots of things. In the process of developing technology, it could be used for road mapping and project management, all sorts of things. But in particular, of interest to people trying to sell space stuff, it's used in so-called source selection. So if the government goes to pick, I don't know, a star tracker, okay, they will go for probably the off-the-shelf solution that is very high TRL, that's very mature and proven, as opposed to this new technology idea that's maybe not all that proven. It's a little wacky, and we're not quite sure we trust it yet. So the opportunity here for us working on behalf of DoD is to mature the technologies to the point where you can, in fact, get across that threshold. You can prove that your product is worth DoD buying. So we partner with you to advance the TRL from 1, the hit your head on the sink and wake up with a flux capacitor idea, all the way through 7. And in our case, that means an on-orbit or in-orbit demonstration. As I say there in the yellow box, most customers require TRL 6 or above. So that's sort of the point here. And we'll go back into the facilities a little bit more. Let me wrap this quick intro up with a bit more about the facilities. So here's an example of the sort of workflow you might expect. You come to NYCST, you apply for and receive some funding. And that funding could be actual cash money. It could also mean training for your people. It could mean access to facilities, could mean equipment access, and could be support from our staff. Any or all of those things could be part of the resources that we, NYCST, provide to you, our partner. You retain the intellectual property. We're not looking to own any of the IP that you're developing. In fact, our motivation is pretty much the opposite. We want you to be successful, and we are effectively an intermediary providing expertise, access to facilities, but not trying to own those investments. You would mature your technology within some project-specific space. Now, here's a few examples. Again, we can talk about them later, but you might, for example, want to focus on electronics, in which case you probably want one of the spaces with a clean room. Or maybe your device is more mechanical than anything else, in which case you can have one of the mechanical spaces. Anyway, you get a space for your project. And unlike, I guess, a lot of startup incubators and other things I've seen where everyone's all thrown into a big warehouse and you all share desks and one coffee machine, I mean, that can work great. But in this case, this is a bit more of a maker space in the sense that there are sure shared facilities and things, but you get your own place for your own stuff. And being a kid in a family with many siblings, I can appreciate having space for my own stuff. And I think you might appreciate that too, in the context of ensuring that your technology is yours and doesn't accidentally become your competitors. Once you have matured that technology to, let's say, TRL4, which means you got some solid prototype going, you might validate its performance in any of our environmental test facilities. Now, unlike a typical, call it makerspace, this is very much about spacecraft. It's very much about orbital behaviors. So just, a couple of dirty drills and a couple of lathes is not really where we're going to add value. Where we're adding value is in that equipment that allows you to test your components as if they were flying in space. So certainly a lot of startups, but even larger corporations who are maybe trying to retool and get into the space business, they don't have access to these things. So we fill that gap. We can provide that access and accelerate your success toward getting your products at the high enough TRL to be sold. Anyway, validate the performance in a vacuum in the context of vibration and other things too. Finally, let's say that your device is something that needs to be part of the future of big space. Now, this is a whole other discussion we could have, but for a couple of decades now, we've talked about this thing, new space, which really is private space companies and a few other things. Well, these days, I think that has pivoted to what I'll call big space, and that is very large rockets, permanent infrastructure in orbit, missions that span Earth to Moon and back that include NASA, DoD, the intelligence community, and others. That big space story is one that is not being told very well. It's not about building a single spacecraft. It's not even about building, let's say, many Starlink communication satellites. It's about large scale, it's about infrastructure and a grand scope of Earth to Moon. With that in mind, one of the challenges for any company trying to develop that hardware is, how do I test this big space idea without going to space? So we have in mind, and this will be finished in, we hope, about a year, a very large scale, probably 40 meters on a side, 40 feet on a side, about 10 meters-ish, a large docking and simulation environment. So imagine a chunk of the space station in the lab. We have a gantry crane. We're doing a few other things that would allow your hardware to move around in all degrees of freedom, maybe dock with that space station if that's what you're trying to do, maybe take pictures of it, maybe communicate with it, all of which requires the subtlety of physical interactions. So we will provide that, and you can have time in that simulator environment. So you've gone from developing the technology to the point where it probably will work, testing it to be sure it works in the right environment, demonstrating its functionality, and now you can develop the mission operations tools that you need, the commands to send to your device, or the way in which data facilities on the ground interact with your device. That's what happens in our Mission Control Center. When that is fully successful, I would say your device is at TRL 6. Now we can work with you to secure and prepare for a flight demonstration, and even conduct that flight demonstration in orbit in our Orbital Mission Control Center, which is right next door. So I think we offer a kind of soup to nuts or cradle to grave technology development environment. Through partnerships, we can leverage the resources we have to help make New York businesses and businesses in the region successful in pursuing advanced technology for space. And of course, you can enter or exit the sequence at any time you want. And maybe it's only a part of this that makes sense for you. But the fact that we have this full range, I think, makes this virtually unique, if not completely unique, in the nation, certainly in the region. This is there's nothing like it elsewhere. So I'm excited about this. I hope you are too. And I'm going to cut it off there and give Patrick a chance to ask me questions and fix things I did not talk about well. So Patrick, what do you got?
that was a fantastic introduction. If you could talk about it for an hour, I'm sure that I could listen. Ever since this project came on my radar, it's been fantastic. It's been great for Empire Space to help kind of bring this along. So lots of information. I guess we'll kind of go through a couple of different pieces. Stepping back to the very beginning, like the DoD role, like what is their structure? What is their intent? What was kind of their vision for putting this out? How did this come to be, and what are their kind of key objectives at the end?
That's the Office of Local Defense Community Cooperation, OLDCC. It's part of the government that, for the Department of Defense at least, responsible for acquisition and sustainment. So this is a little different from the part of the government that maybe some companies are used to working with, which is the sort of technology side, the advanced science and technology folks, or the people who really focus on the devices, the instruments, the software, that kind of technology stuff. These folks are actually not really about the technology. They're actually about the industry base. Specifically, their role is to help states, United States and communities adjust to some major change that might be going on related to DoD activities. Now, the L is local. The idea is there are some local defense entities in the region who have maybe a particular stake in the space technology hardware. We are interpreting this charge, though, to be fairly broad. We're really talking about anything Space Force or Air Force, or frankly, any different branch of the military. Also, beyond DoD, the intelligence community, all whatever 13 members of the intelligence community there may be. So it's pretty broad in that sense, but we can still successfully focus our efforts on defense-related local issues in preparedness to develop and provide to the DoD the space hardware, and still successfully cover that whole waterfront. So OLDCC is part of the acquisition, part of the government, part of the Department of Defense, and they've given us 3 years of funding to get this thing going. You can call it seed funding if you like. Because we are certified to do this stuff, we have a very special role within the government. There's only, I think, 7 of these things that were selected this past round. So there's not a lot of places doing this kind of stuff. I think we are, in fact, unique, though, in doing it specifically for space. So we have quite a responsibility. We need this to go well. We, Cornell, need this to go well. And then also, because I'm just a passionate advocate for all things space, I feel responsible for making sure that we can advance and accelerate that future which is coming at us. And that's a future of a sustained presence in space. Sustained for commercial reasons, scientific reasons, just human reasons in general. And all of the economic benefit that then accrues to us as a result of that is something I'm hugely looking forward to. And I think this is a step in that direction, certainly for the region. So a long answer to your question, Patrick, but that's where this comes from originally, this OLDCC organization. So it's a little surprising that we are sponsoring a lot of technology development, despite that this is not really the technology side of DoD. But it's not surprising if you consider that the point is to prepare our region for developing these technologies to deliver to DoD. So this is the formula for success, we think.
Excellent. That was another incredibly insightful answer, especially realizing kind of the uniqueness of the facility, not even just within the New York space ecosystem, just within the entire nation, really speaks to the importance of it. And so I know that there are the 2 primary projects. One was the facility that you had discussed at Cornell. I will throw out there for the audience. I have had a chance to see it. It's still in the early stages, but you can still get the vibe for it. So I know at some point, if you wanted to go into a deeper dive about the history of that facility and what you're hoping to build out there. And then I know the other side is supports to businesses and workforce development. So kind of just give us a deeper view of what those 2 halves of the pie look like.
Let me start with the facilities half of the pie. So what we've done is we've generously, we are the recipients of an entire, well, not an entire building, a lot of the building that you see there in front of you. This is Ward Hall. It has a storied history in the region, in fact, in the nation. In 1956, it was built to house one of the very first nuclear reactors on a university campus, and it was part of the nuclear science program we had here. That science is sort of a done thing? No, there's certainly more research to be done in nuclear engineering and nuclear power, but it's pretty well understood. It's like, I don't know, self-driving cars. This is a really cool idea 20 years ago. Now it's kind of like, well, we know how to do that. Okay, let's move on. In the case of this facility, one of the really exciting things was it was designed and built less than 10 years after the Manhattan Project, which, if you saw the movie Oppenheimer, you know that was the project that created the nuclear bombs that really changed the course of history. That nuclear technology, 10 years on, became the subject of the work being done here at Ward Hall. The role that Ward had in cutting edge technology, like decade fresh technology pursued over many decades, making advancements that have shaped the world that we now understand. We want that to happen again for space. So there was some time ago, early part of the 20th century, when Cornell had these aeronautics labs. It was closely tied to the Curtiss Wright Aircraft Corporation, which was in Western New York. That was the Wright brothers company, effectively. We had a long history of contributing to defense-related and sort of civil space or civil aeronautics-related technologies. And then at some point during the Vietnam War, Cornell divested of the Cornell Aeronautics Labs. And we really haven't had anything like that since. They still exist in some form in the Buffalo area, but that's no longer part of Cornell. We hope we are revitalizing Cornell's central role in national level priorities for aerospace by transforming Ward, with its history of contributions to science and technology, into the place where we'll make the next 20 to 50 years worth of innovations in aerospace. So this facility has an extraordinary history. It has what you would expect it would have for a modern environment, all the high-speed network and workspaces. We have a training space, and we're really actually looking forward to how that's going to work with a number of different classes and training opportunities. More to come on that. So, although in the past, by the way, it had a train car access, you could actually drive up to it with a train. We no longer do that because trains also, like self-driving cars, are kind of a thing of the past, or at least the near present. So we understand how that all stuff works. One thing I didn't mention, ISAM. So in-space assembly and manufacturing. This is about 18 months ago, the White House put out this policy document emphasizing the role of this for space and for the nation. So this is something that I think will surprise a lot of people, maybe not this audience, but surprise people who haven't been paying really close attention to what space has become in the last decade. We are now at a point where it's going to become commonplace, maybe even also already started, to refuel spacecraft, to build them in orbit. In fact, to depend on an orbiting infrastructure for repair and assembly and manufacture and all sorts of other tasks we have thought of as being terrestrial up to this point. We're going to depend on that for the future of space. So this future of Earth to Moon, which I called cislunar before, this future of Earth to Moon, whether that is, again, human or scientific or commercial or military or all the above, that future is going to be one enabled by things that are already in space. In fact, one way to look at it is all of the mass we will ever need to produce that future, a sustained future in space, is already there. It's just in the wrong shape. It might be lunar regolith or material from asteroids or just reused hardware from space. It's already out there. When we manufacture our space future in orbit, that's ISAM, ISAM. So our operations concepts that we would be able to help you guys develop, that's what's being referred to there. So the ISAM CONOPS, in-space assembly manufacturing, concept of operations, and then 6 DOF, that means 6 degrees of freedom. So that means translating and rotating and all the behaviors that need to happen in space. I wish I could say it's easy to just try this out with a couple of little robots moving around on the ground, but it's not. You really got to get the full 3D stuff right, and that's what this is going to be. So that's a key feature of this facility. It's meant to be a facility for the mid-21st century, even though as a building, it was built in the mid-20th century. Now, you asked also about a couple of other aspects, including the business assistance. So let me just do that one a little quicker. Main thing is we have a solicitation. It's going to come out, I think, every 6 months, roughly. That solicitation asks for proposals. You propose, we've made this as lean a process as possible. You propose with a quad chart, which is to say just a single page with 4 quadrants on it, where you say simple things like, here's what I'm trying to do, here's how much it's going to cost, here's how I know it's successful, and here are the people who are going to do it. Something like that. On the basis of that quad chart, we select a number of proposals to go forward to a pitch day. So you come to our annual symposium, you pitch these proposals, and then we select some to fund fully. And again, it's funding, yes, it's dollars, but to be honest, the value of the facilities, the collaborations, the expertise, and other things probably vastly exceeds the amount of money that's available. It's about $1.2 million in total project funding that we can afford. Any given project is probably no more than $100,000. It's a lot of money for a small business, probably not a lot for a large business. But again, that's not really where I think the value lies. It really lies in the collaborative activities that happen in the facility, advancing the TRL of these components. So that's what we're trying to focus on. The cash is necessary. I understand it's a financial lubricant that needs to be there, but I don't think it's where the game ends. In fact, another way of saying that is if you just need cash, you should go to DoD and ask them for cash. There are plenty of proposal opportunities. What they can't give you is this kind of collaboration. So that's where I'd like you to take a look at it. There's other forms of business assistance, including support for entrepreneurship. We'll have some training on that. Also training up your staff. Let's say that they need to know how to conduct thermal vacuum testing to verify that your hardware will work in space. Well, we have those facilities. We have folks who've done it before, and we'll have a class, and we would train you guys up. So that's another opportunity. So those are your 2 questions there, Patrick. How close did I get?
You got very close.
Okay,
so I guess the answer to the second one provokes another one. Are those solicitations open to everyone? Do you have to be a consortium member? Are there different types of solicitations based for members and non-members? And then how do businesses become members? Do you have to be a business? Is it open to everyone? I guess tell us about that component.
Yeah, it really is open to everyone. So we would entertain proposals from any entity. Selecting them is another question. So in order to receive the funding or the resources generally, you'll need to be, what's the word? Your business has to be compatible with DoD expectations, which means you got to have the ability to sell things to DoD. That means you probably have to be able to comply with rules like the International Traffic in Arms Regulations, ITAR, or the Export Arms Regulations, EAR, and a wide number of other regulations. That's not really my business. I got to tell you, I think I understand those things, but what that is that we won't say yes or no on that basis. But in order for you to be successful, you're going to have to be a no-kidding organization capable of working with the DoD. At the moment, that's the kind of the only, I don't even call it limitation, that's the only requirement. Going forward, depending on where we find some funding, we might even be able to relax that further. It is also true that right now, while we can bring in universities, so in the current round, I guess I really can't comment much about the current round, but just broadly, there are a number of universities that have proposed ideas for technology development that we are considering for funding. Most of what we will end up funding is, well, if we're doing our jobs right, all of what we will fund can directly impact the competitiveness of the region in advanced space technology manufacturing and or workforce development. So really, it's not like a research grant. That's not really what it is. Sure, you can do some research along the way, but the goal is climbing up that TRL thermometer to the point where you have a hot product to sell, at least hot enough to demonstrate in space, and therefore you've gotten where you wanted to get. Yeah, so it's not we're trying to make this as versatile or as flexible as we can. Once you have submitted a proposal, if we want to accept the proposal, we would then work with that organization to sign some kind of a memorandum of understanding that would specify these things like you got to be able to work with DoD and you need to be able to accept the money under these circumstances and blah blah blah. It's not actually very much, to be honest with you. So there definitely are some details, and we can drill down if you like, but the bottom line is take a look at your portfolio of technology aspirations, take a look at our solicitation, give it a try, and you'll get feedback.
Excellent. That is very sound advice to anyone out there that's listening. You had mentioned the TRLs a couple of times in that answer. I don't know if you wanted to revisit that slide real quick, and if there was any kind of expansion you wanted to offer on that. I know it's kind of at the core of what NYCST is about, is helping people kind of move up this list. So if you wanted to dive into it again, I think it would be worthwhile for the audience.
Yeah, I'll give that a try. This image comes from NASA. There are many images like this, and there's thousands of pages written about TRL. You can look it up. Once again, I think it was actually begun at NASA and then adopted by DoD and elsewhere. If this is supposed to be on the left, it's supposed to be a thermometer. I think that metaphor doesn't work well here, because they start with dark red, implying hot, but of course that's low on the thermometer. Then it gets a higher temperature, becomes less hot. So the metaphor is not great. So don't worry about the colors, okay? I think the colors are actually meant to say red is dangerous, green is safe, or something like that, okay? That's really what it's about. But what I want you to focus on is the kind of prototyping and the kind of demonstrations that these different technology readiness levels require. So again, TRL1, we call that basic principles observed and reported. That is, I will say, the end of science. Here I am talking about engineering, I'm talking about technology, I'm talking about innovation. I'm not talking about science. I'm not talking about, interrogating the natural world. We're not talking about discovering new ways to help DNA replicate. We're not talking about what kind of geology exists on Mars. These are awesome questions, and I love them, but it's not what we do. Instead, this is about, once you know the science, once you know, for example, that a certain mathematical algorithm exists, and you want to maybe instantiate it in a piece of software, now you're at TRL1. So basic principles observed and reported means that someone has in fact gone through the scientific method. But you guys know this, right? Science and engineering are different disciplines. That's why we have different names for them. A scientist uses the scientific method. They form a hypothesis based on observations, and then they do some experimentation to validate that hypothesis, and maybe it becomes a theory. And that's it. You do not put your conclusions in your premises, or you've violated the scientific method. For engineering, it's basically the opposite. We start with a goal. We start with trying to make something happen. When a scientist does that, they're cheating, right? They're violating some fundamental principle of science. For an engineer, we are wasting our time if we don't know where we're going. So we know where we're going. We're trying to head for TRL9. TRL9 is the actual system flight proven through successful mission operations. So, and plural, by the way, it's not an accident either. You could take as an example, you've probably heard of the James Webb Space Telescope, right? Super cool, super successful $12 billion project that has this very subtle way of keeping the heat out of the telescope. It's a sunshade. It's a multi-layer mirror that made of very lightweight materials that prevents the heat from soaking into the telescope. And that's important because the telescope itself is looking sometimes at infrared signatures, and heat, of course, is infrared. So if the telescope gets hot, you see the heat of the sun, you don't see the heat of the distant galaxy or whatever you're trying to look at. So anyway, this insulation is important. This sunshade is important. It has flown exactly one time successfully. So I think you would have to say that the James Webb Space Telescope's sun shield is definitely TRL8. I don't know if you'd say TRL9. Possibly at the end of the James Webb Space Telescope JWST mission, possibly that'd be called TRL9. For sure, it would be TRL9 if the same thing flies again on another spacecraft. So everything between TRL1 and TRL9 is the business of technology developers, of technologists. So let's say at your company you have a chief technologist. That chief technologist has the role of care and feeding of your technology development, understanding how to buy down the risk through investment in technology maturation to the point where you can sell this product. These individual steps are, in fact, those steps toward buying down that risk. And I'm not going to run through all of them, but I'm going to point out TRL3. TRL3 is probably where university level stuff ends. So let's say, for example, you were to partner with, I'll name any university, I love them all, University at Buffalo, okay, great institution. Let's say you were to partner with Buffalo. Let's say you're going to partner with them on an attitude control algorithm. TRL3 means you have demonstrated that at the level of critical functions, probably in a simulation. Maybe you're using MATLAB or Python or C or something like that. But no one has really built anything. But you've definitely proven the principle. So an analytical or experimental critical function or proof of concept. At that point, at TRL3, classically, a university hands over responsibility for technology development to industry. Now, often academics can remain as partners for the process, and maybe even that makes sense, but that's not classically the role of the university. Instead, industry, they are not typically basic R&D organizations. They typically want to take something where they've got some intellectual property, that they've done some kind of characterization, and then advance it to a product. So that probably begins somewhere around TRL4, where you're going to do what they call a breadboard validation. So imagine a circuit board, right? A bunch of little holes, you have some wires plugging stuff in together, but it's not actually fabricated in a useful way. Nevertheless, it is in fact the no kidding circuit board that contains within it the algorithm I was talking about a second ago, as an example. And you'll do that in a laboratory environment. But you'll notice that laboratory environment thing, that kind of continues in 4, 5, and 6. At TRL6, we say you're demonstrating that prototype in a relevant environment. Relevant here means, space-like, but not necessarily space. And it's 7 where typically you say you've taken it to space. So that transition from 6 to 7, that's very expensive, but it should not be risky. Going from 6 to 7 means you're going to take that same old piece of hardware that you were sure worked on the ground, you'll put on a rocket, you'll show that the same thing happens in space. You got to show it. As they say in the Air Force, it can't fly until it flies. So you got to show that it works. But at that point, now you're good to go. So anyway, that's a bit more of a deep dive on TRL. Hope that's useful.
No, that was very informative. Thank you, especially to someone who is not an engineer by trade. I know that the step through that can be very helpful. So I know we have about 20 minutes left. We do have a couple of questions that have come in. There's a few other questions that I had for you. The symposium, you had mentioned an upcoming symposium. I didn't know how much you wanted to share about that. I know that Empire Space is looking forward to being there.
Thanks. So the symposium has a couple of key features. One of them, it'll be the event at which we announce the selectees for the first round of funding that we opened up a couple of months ago. So don't feel bad if you haven't heard about it. Now you have, and you can apply next time. So that's one of the key events. Reasons for you to attend. You'll be able to network just like you are at Space Week here, but you'll be able to network with folks who are directly connected to NYCST. We're going to hold the symposium in person here with a bunch of free food at the Sattler Hotel on campus, and you will be able to see the Ward Hall facilities for yourself in whatever shape they are in when that happens, and you'll be able to make a decision on the basis of should we in fact partner with these guys, or maybe you'll find other connections that could be valuable for you from a business perspective or just an intellectual perspective. So networking, collaboration, those are opportunities. We will also have some key keynote speakers. So the two for sure that we have confirmed, I can't give you their names, unfortunately, but one of them is a representative of the intelligence community who will be talking about priorities for the IC when it comes to space technology. And the other is from OLDCC itself, the organization sponsoring this, talking about what they think it's going to take to elevate the region's capabilities in DoD space manufacturing. So I think it's super relevant to the things that presumably you care about if you're on this call, and I definitely would love to have you. So take a look at the website. I don't want to take too much time with advertising it, but I do think it's going to be worthwhile. I think it's going to be unique in that it's a lot of interaction. It's not just sitting to people, listening to people make some academic speeches. This, I hope, is directly relevant. We'll have a couple of working group meetings. We'll have a chance to take some tours of various things. I should mention, and I haven't, and it's my mistake, not only are we focused on these Ward Hall facilities, but also on existing stuff at Cornell, which by virtue of how we're setting this up, you can also have access to if you're part of NYCST. Specifically the Cornell Center for Materials Research, CCMR, where you'll be able to collaboratively work on materials science related challenges. This could be things like testing or maybe sort of subtle fabrication techniques associated with some sort of advanced device you're trying to fabricate, or work with the Cornell High Energy Synchrotron Source, CHESS, or CLASS, the sort of overall structure that it's part of. And in chess, you can use our extraordinary X-ray capabilities to shine a beam through metal and other structures to see the internal structure, the atomic structure of these things. So you can interrogate metals and other things with an X-ray source. They'll tell you a lot about their fracture toughness and a variety of other material science stuff. So those two both have relevance to material science, but also they are part of the so-called AFRL network. It's the hub of organizations tied to the Air Force research labs in the region. So there's really a lot of connectivity available at the symposium, and through the combination of the tours and the workshops, I expect you'll get something out of it. If nothing else, it's a relatively cheap way to get some food at the Statler. So there you go.
There you go. And for those who are on the call, I've placed the link to the website, the symposium page, in the chat. One more kind of quick question, then we'll get into some of the basics to wrap up. But in terms of partnerships, collaborations with academic groups, economic development agencies, private companies, apart from groups becoming members of the consortia, what kind of collaborative programming are you looking to do with other organizations?
With government agencies, I think we have the opportunity to help them in putting them in touch with the entities that they may need to do business with or may want to do business with. It's quite difficult, as I guess Patrick, from your work, it's quite difficult for a government agency to kind of curate all these relationships with hundreds, maybe thousands of individual companies with a relatively small staff. So serving as a kind of intermediary or clearinghouse or something like that, we can help improve that connection by saying these folks are working on some space tech, here's our portfolio, and then they can kind of take it from there. So that's sort of a quick way of talking about that. That's not to say we're trying to get in the way of whatever marketing or business development activities these companies may have with the government, whatever B2G, business to government relationships they're seeking, and that's not what I'm trying to say. But I am saying that sometimes for these organizations, it's a little difficult for them to make those connections, and so we can help there. The other thing that's, I think, important is we might not be a great fit for a company that has all the facilities they need, all of the, let's say, connections they need to the government, the state or the federal government, all the collaborations, all the suppliers they need. Maybe there's nothing we can do for those guys. Still, having them as partners means they have the opportunity to understand maybe other suppliers that they could be partnered with or could use their own supply chain, as well as give their folks opportunities to advance or to kind of change their direction a little bit. An example, I'm not going to name the company here, but a major aerospace company in the state contacted us, at least a person from it contacted us and said, this is great because I've got all these internal research and development projects I'd like to pursue, but we haven't got either access to the facilities because they're all being used for existing, paid customer projects, or I can't get the staff because they are also being used for these paid customer projects. And yet there is a budget internally for some R&D activity. So they have the resources, but they don't have the facilities. Weirdly, again, you would think major aerospace companies have got nothing but real estate. Not really true. So in fact, there is a value proposition for these guys to be able just to kind of go off, do their thing, and not get bugged with other stuff until they're able to bring back to their organization a more mature product that can then maybe enter the business development pipeline. So there is, in fact, kind of a role for that. So I'm listing different aspects of this collaboration or connectivity thing you asked, Patrick. Yet another one is for small businesses. Some businesses in particular, if you've only got a handful of employees, almost certainly you don't have a thermal vacuum chamber, all the environmental test facilities you would probably need to verify the performance of your hardware in a space environment. So using these facilities as shared, they're owned by the university, but we can give you access to them and access to your partners as well. That's a great model. We'll end up putting a lot of miles on this equipment, but better that than that just sit unused. So rather than making the investment in your own infrastructure and using it once every 6 months, use ours. You'll never have to invest in that hardware. So I think that's a significant value proposition for the smaller companies. Anyway, that's also true in a different way for CHESS and CCMR, the organizations at Cornell, where we have long-standing expertise and many decades worth of collaborations. There, it's really the expertise that becomes valuable. Let's say you think you want to test some material, but you don't really know how. the scientists at CHESS or similar folks at CCMR can be the ones that help you with that. And so there, it could be that you're not necessarily buying access to equipment. It's really that you're getting through the partnership here access to expertise that might take decades for you to develop on your own. But instead, we just got it here, so let's use ours.
Interesting. Thank you for filling out some of the different dimensions of collaboration there. Before we take a couple of questions, if anyone in the audience has questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I know there's one there already. We'll get to that in just a second. So just basics, website, LinkedIn, any way that people can follow you, check up on news, email address, point of contact for how folks can learn more if they want to become members of the consortium or solicitations. So I believe it's all right here on the screen.
It is. So NYCST.com is the site. And I've showed you the front page already, the splash page. It's got news, progress reports, events, and project opportunities. It's all there. I hope it's easily found. I think the guy who put it together, Greg, did a fantastic job. You can, we will be sending out a newsletter. We haven't had enough news to communicate yet, but we will be doing that. And you can go to just email us at info@nyspacetech.com, and that'll put you on a list, and we will include you. For my part, I know I could do with probably less email in a given day. So if that's not really your cup of tea, still doesn't hurt to get in touch with us and to let us know what you do need, and we are happy to follow up.
Excellent. Well, thank you for putting all those out there. We will take a couple of questions now. So Ivan in the chat, if you are already receiving funding from SDA or Space Force, can you still apply for facility use if it's going to be used for both agencies?
Yes, I see no reason why not. This would be in addition to, not instead of, or in some way duplicative of the other resources that you're getting. Yeah, there's no preclusion there. There are opportunities to sweeten your proposal with cost share. I'll say it that way. Maybe I should say it another way. That helps. One of the things we need to show to our sponsor is that other folks have skin in the game. Typically, we seek non-federal match, but that doesn't mean that there isn't value. There is value to your already having some connectivity to an existing agency, so Space Development Agency or Space Force. I think showing in your proposal that this is relevant to those customers is a feather in your cap, and it's something we would look for. We would look for a path to transition. In other words, whether that's a channel partner in the form of some other organization that's going to be doing something specific for you, or a sponsor who's looking for your work to be completed, that both of those are stories that help us understand what we can do to help. And so in your proposal, that'd be valuable.
All right, thank you for clearing that up. I saw a clap go up from Ivan, so hopefully that was a helpful answer for you. I don't know. We had an RSVP from Greg Grosditz. He's actually from Space Force SDA. He just wanted to say hello. I didn't know if he was on the call. If he was, I would let him say hello. We don't seem to have him right now.
Looking at stuff, a refinement to my previous question. The question was, can I get money for both? You know this, that you cannot be funded for substantially the same work. In other words, you can't write a proposal to a government agency saying, I'm going to do the following for the following amount of money, and then do the same thing to another organization. Same work, but more money for the same work. See, that's double dipping. So you can't do that. But I assume that's not what you have in mind. I assume you're not talking about double dipping. I assume what you're saying is this is a project that's going on, but we need some other resources also, in which case this would be perfectly appropriate.
Excellent. I don't know if we have any other questions right now. While we wait to see if anyone has anything. I had one just kind of personally, stepping back a bit. Because I know, Mason, you've been around Cornell, all sorts of different, space projects over the years. You know the history and the ebbs and flows over time of the New York space ecosystem.
One gray hair for each failed project. So yeah.
There we go. So I guess if you could just give us some perspective, how have things evolved over time, kind of more broadly for space in New York? And then really just kind of frame it, how significant are these new capabilities in terms of what has existed for, these satellite manufacturers in the state before?
Yeah, there's been a couple of interesting trends. I'm going to rewind the clock to the late 90s. And some folks may remember, maybe not you, Patrick, I think you were probably born then, but you may remember that in the time of Iridium and Orbicom and a number of other constellations in the mid-90s, there was this belief that suddenly these space companies that exist all around the nation, they still do, and more every day, these space companies are going to change from a kind of a model of artisanal fabrication of a single device once or twice a year to more of a factory model, an automotive assembly line type of model. There was a belief that that might happen. That did not happen for a variety of economic reasons and technical ones. So instead, and also government regulation ones. So instead, the late 90s saw a kind of a plummet in space technology investment for a variety of reasons, mostly due to some, I think, unintended consequences of government regulation. But slowly, starting in the early 2000s, that kind of turned around. It turned around in a couple ways. There was private investment in rocket companies. Even today, there's something like 106 rocket companies starting up. I mean, that number is mind-boggling because I guarantee no more than a couple are going to be successful, but got to give it a try. So nevertheless, back in the 2000s, like early 2000s, right, there was this sudden pivot where SpaceX and many other companies, Blue Origin was another one, Sierra Space or Sierra Nevada at the time, again, a number of them, started thinking, how could we do space differently? The seeds that had been planted a little earlier, in fact, as late as the late 80s, people were talking about small spacecraft as a way to get around some of the impediments of space. Mm-hmm. So fast forward now to the early 2000s, you find CubeSats suddenly appearing on the scene, as if from nowhere. If you haven't heard, a CubeSat is a spacecraft the size of a grapefruit, and it is 10 by 10 by 10 centimeters, and it's a liter of spacecraft, so 1 kilogram, 10 by 10 by 10 centimeters. It seems like you couldn't do much with it. In fact, in the early 2000s, these were seen as toys or maybe academic exercises, but no one's really going to care. Now, in fact, it's been true for the last 10 years. They are the most commonly launched type of spacecraft in the world. Hundreds of these things launch every year. Now, that's going to change a little bit pretty soon with Starlink, because the Starlink platforms themselves, just as a single constellation, is going to change that whole story. But it's still a similar story in that it depends on replicated technology. So I think one of the trends that we've seen, certainly in New York and probably nationwide, is universities training students on CubeSats. Those universities go off to NASA, DoD, SpaceX, all sorts of organizations, and infuse those organizations with the quick, agile, risk-tolerant perspective that CubeSats taught them back in their university days. So you can thank Buffalo, I think Cornell, RPI, RIT, a number of other organizations, institutions in the state for making that happen. I will give you the quick example of a couple of CubeSat students who, in the early days of our CubeSat programs here at Cornell, worked on those projects. So 20 years on, one of them is a VP at SpaceX. One of them is CEO and founder of a large space data mining company. He's also in the region, by the way. And yet another is CEO of the first in-space manufacturing company making pharmaceuticals in space for profit. So these things are happening indirectly because of this pivot towards small space, which itself happened indirectly because of a pivot away from the big space constellations that had failed. So I think it's a fascinating evolution. I don't know if you guys agree with my timeline here, a fascinating evolution toward what is now, I think, the trend that we're about to see hit, and we're already kind of seeing it. I mentioned ISAM before, the in-space servicing assembly manufacturing. Also around the corner is just big space in general. Infrastructure, yes, but also something like the ability to launch 150 metric tons, maybe 200 metric tons at a shot into Earth orbit. That's thanks to SpaceX's Starship Super Heavy combination. That one launch vehicle will allow you to launch something at a price per kilogram cheaper than FedExing something across the country. So I could FedEx a kilogram across the country for 30 or 40 bucks. I could send it to space for about 10 or 20 bucks on SpaceX's Super Heavy. That is absolutely transformative. Because honestly, the impediment to most space commerce has simply been the price of launch. When the launch is expensive, so is insurance. The risk posture is one that everything has got to work perfectly the first time. So you hire a huge fleet of PhDs to make sure that your spacecraft works right. All those costs end up as an impediment to the success of space commerce. So that's going to change the landscape, I think, overnight. So I could be rash in predicting that, but I'm going to predict it anyway and say, if New York wants to be at the forefront the way we were 100 years ago in aviation, we've got to embrace big space. We've got to tool up to anticipate the needs of a big space economy, and we've got to develop the technologies that will make that successful. So NYC is positioned to make that possible. The trends I'm talking about, I think you can find evidence of them. I'm not just kind of put on my ear, but that's going to be stuff that will drive the success of our industry base, I think, for the next probably 50 years.
Fantastic, insightful answer. As always, I kind of had, and you were right at the beginning, left unchecked, you and I could probably go for another hour. But we are approaching the 4 o'clock hour. We've been here for an hour already. Are there any final questions from the audience? Is there anything in the chat? Does anyone want to raise a hand? Any final thoughts from you, Mason? Plug for the symposium again.
It's on June 14th. It costs $100, and you'll get more than that in the free food alone. But I'd like to think that you'll find the conversation and the partnering opportunities far more valuable than the food. So please come.
Excellent. I know that Empire Space will be there. I know that Evan and I are looking forward to it. So yes, thank you, Ivan, again for the question. That was very insightful. Thank you all for your attendance and your participation in this Space Week New York event, this Spotlight NYCST. It really was a fantastic interview. We want to thank Mason for taking the time to give us such an informative and enthusiastic presentation about what NYCST is about, what they're hoping to achieve for the New York space ecosystem. Empire Space has been honored to participate, to be a member of the consortium, just to hear about all of the exciting possibilities that stem from this initiative. So yeah, thank you all for taking the time. Thank you all for your work and contributions to the New York space ecosystem. And we hope to see you for future events this week.
Thank you, Patrick.
All right. Thank you all. Have a good day.